If you want to build a great business, you need to build great systems. And who better to learn from than the master system builder, Mother Nature. In this video, I'm going to discuss 7 principles from nature that entrepreneurs can use to improve their businesses. I'll give a high-level description of each principle and demonstrate them through examples from both nature and business. Nature has produced systems that have endured billions of years, so it's natural for us to look to these systems as a source of wisdom and inspiration. That's the motivation for this talk, which is the culmination of 3 main things. The first is my formal training. I got a PhD in physics, and here's a photo of me admiring the wisdom of nature. The second are several books that talk about this idea from many different perspectives. And the third and final thing is putting these principles into practice through my entrepreneurial ventures, including things like content creation, independent consulting, and running a community for entrepreneurs. The first principle is diversity, which is what underlies the resilience of many natural systems. And so a great example of this are naturally occurring prairies, which support a wide diversity of species, including grains and wheats that we might eat. And the thing about these prairies is that they're incredibly resilient to storms, droughts. They don't really have weeds. They don't really suffer from pests. This is in contrast to monocultures. In other words, where every crop is exactly the same, like we see in traditional farming. While this is the logical way to maximize the output of a particular crop, it has a big problem, which is that monocultures amplify the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the prominent species. For example, if we have a wheat farm, pests like the Hessian fly can thrive in this environment because wheat is a food source for these insects. However, in a prairie, since there's a wide diversity of species, there's not the same opportunity for pests to proliferate. We can say the prairie is resilient while the wheat farm is fragile. A business example of this from my personal experience comes from content creation, where I post about a wide variety of topics, including things about freelancing and data science, large language models, and other technical topics such as the wavelet transform. The upside of posting about a lot of different things is that I can draw a wider audience to my content. And beyond just writing about many different topics on a single platform, I also create content on multiple platforms. So this is like a second layer of diversity. And I feel the strategy of posting related content on both Medium and YouTube has been one of the main drivers of my growth on both of the platforms. However, diversity doesn't come without its downside. So an obvious one is that there's this tension between diversity and maximizing output. So figuring out the right balance of diversity to make your system resilient while still maintaining the level of output that you need to see depends on the specifics of the situation. The second principle is redundancy. In other words, having backups in case something fails. An example of this from nature is in our bodies. We have 2 lungs, we have 2 arms, we have 2 kidneys. So if any one lung, arm, or kidney gets injured, the overall system can still function. In other words, we can survive. An example of this from the business world is when I worked at a large enterprise, I was one of many data scientists sitting on the data science team. Having this redundancy meant if I wanted to take a vacation or if I wanted to leave the company, the overall system, the overall team would be just fine because the work could be easily reallocated. But like diversity, redundancy has a downside, which is that when you have redundant systems, you incur a cost without much marginal value. In other words, the marginal value of having 1 data scientist versus no data scientists is a lot bigger than having 2 data scientists than 1 data scientist. Taking a step back, our first 2 principles seem to have a little bit of tension. Principle 1 told us to have many different things, while principle 2 said to have many of the same thing. And each of them had some associated downside. But what if there was a way we could get the best of both worlds? So that's possible through principle number 3. degeneracy. And I like to think of this as a blend of diversity and redundancy. So to see this, let's define each of these words visually. Diversity means everything looks different. For example, if we have 3 boxes, diversity would mean that each box looks different. On the other hand, redundancy looks something like this, where each box looks exactly the same. The way we can blend these things together is if we had 3 boxes where one was a blend of red and green, another was a blend of green and blue, and then the last one was a blend of blue and red. This way of doing things allows us to have diversity because each of these boxes is slightly different, and redundancy because each box has some overlap in their underlying color at the same time. This is an idea I first saw from the book Antifragile by Nassim Taleb, where he described degeneracy as a functional redundancy. In other words, you have separate elements in your system that are different things but have this functional overlap. An example of this from nature is on our face, we have a nose and a mouth, which are 2 different parts of the body that do many different things, but they do have one shared function, which is that you can breathe through both your nose and your mouth. So if your nose is stuffed up, you can still breathe through your mouth, or if you're eating, you can still breathe in through your nose. So an example of this from my business is posting on Medium and YouTube, while these are different things, have a shared function, which is that they both drive traffic to my consulting services. The next principle is recycling. Put another way, in nature, nothing is wasted. A beautiful example of this are trees, which generate oxygen, which is what we breathe in, and then we will exhale carbon dioxide, which the tree breathes in and exhales oxygen, and so on and so forth. Natural systems have this incredible ability to be resourceful and use whatever is available in the environment to promote itself or persist. An example of this from my business is through my content creation on Medium, YouTube, and LinkedIn, many people will reach out to me with a wide array of messages. This isn't a comprehensive list, but some of the most common ones are questions about AI, people wanting me to build projects for them. A recent one was a business reached out to me to create a custom course to train their team. And then another common one is people reaching out because they want a technical co-founder. And so the bottom of my funnel is only meant for one of these things, which is the AI questions. For any questions I can't answer over email, I offer a paid service where I'll hop on a call with an individual or a company to talk through their questions or use case ideas. However, these other things are not services that I offer. So the default response to all these inquiries might be, no, I don't do that. Have a good day. However, that would be incredibly wasteful. So I always try to find a place to put all the different types of inquiries that I receive. So for this Build Me a Project inquiry, I've put together a list of AI consultancies and freelancers that I'll refer these leads to. And if that client ends up working with that firm or consultant, they'll often give me a referral fee. So that's just an added opportunity for revenue. A similar thing with the custom course. So while making this course from scratch isn't something that I do, it is something one of my colleagues does. So I could again refer that lead to that company. And then finally, people reaching out to me about being a co-founder, I'll just redirect them to my community, the data entrepreneurs, which is full of technical folks and resources. The 5th principle is iteration. And from my view, this is what underlies the wisdom of all the natural systems that we see. In other words, the evolutionary process is capable of taking very simple elements like a soup of molecules and turning them into the rich complexity and diversity of life that we see today on Earth. The power of this was captured well by Ray Dalio in his book Principles, where he had this great line, iteration beats intelligence. And the example he gave for that was with COVID, where there was a time not too long ago where COVID was rapidly mutating, and it took an army of PhDs to keep up with this rapid pace of mutations. So this army of PhDs and doctors and medical researchers were struggling to keep up with a very stupid virus. The virus has no intelligence, but through this iterative process, this evolutionary process, this incredible complexity emerges. In the business world, we've known iteration is a really good idea. That's why we have mantras from Silicon Valley like fail fast and move fast and break things, because they figured out the key to getting an idea rolling quickly is to just iterate as fast as possible. Another place we see this is from the famous Toyota production system and their principle of Kaizen, in other words, perpetual improvement, where the idea is you're constantly looking at your process, your system, and looking for opportunities for improvement, no matter what step or what version of it you are on. And in the case of making this video, I did a lot of iterations. So I actually posted these ideas initially on LinkedIn and then made a TikTok about them and posted them on Instagram. Then I refined the ideas a bit and posted again on LinkedIn and then posted again on TikTok and so on and so forth. And at the same time, I've been developing these ideas for probably the last 10 months or so, where I've had many iterations in my notes app, more than I can count. And then once I iterated several times, I posted it on Medium. And then now I'm making this video as yet another iteration of expressing these ideas. Principle number 6 is hierarchy, which means systems have multiple levels of abstraction and complexity. A concrete example of this from nature is we have these things called molecules, and when you get enough molecules hanging out together, they form a cell. And then if you get a bunch of cells together, they form tissues. And if you get a bunch of tissues together, they form organs. And if you piece together a bunch of organs in a particular way, you get an organism. Each of these structures are simultaneously an element of something bigger and the combination of many smaller elements. But of course, we can naturally continue this hierarchy into the business world, because organisms like us get together and form teams. Teams clump together to form departments like HR, sales, or whatever, and departments make up companies. Needless to say, hierarchies are ubiquitous in the natural world and business world. What might not be so obvious, however, is why this is helpful or valuable. In the book Thinking in Systems, the author Donella Meadows raises a really good point, which is that hierarchy simplifies complexity. In other words, it allows one to abstract away the finer details of a system that don't influence its larger behavior. For example, you don't need to understand chemistry to understand human psychology and human behavior. Similarly, the CEO of a company doesn't need to know and understand each individual employee to successfully run the company. But this kind of cuts both ways. While this is beneficial from a high-level perspective, if you do understand chemistry, that doesn't really help you in predicting these larger scale systems. This phenomenon is what scientists call emergence, and it's captured well by phrases like more is different or a system is more than the sum of its parts. This idea highlights the importance of not just the elements of a system, but their connections and how they're interacting with one another. This is something that Geoffrey talks about in his book Scale, and underlies his conclusion that a company doesn't necessarily scale with headcount, but rather scales with the quality of relationships between the individuals of the company and the various teams. The seventh and final principle is symmetry. This is something we see all over the place in nature. The left side of my face looks like the right side of my face. Today's weather is similar to yesterday's weather. However, a special type of symmetry I want to highlight here is what's called self-simillarity. Examples of this in nature include branches and trees. Specifically, branches resemble the trees that they grow from. Another example comes from our lungs, where our bronchioles, these branch-like structures here, look like our bronchi fungi, these larger branch-like structures. Another example that I really like comes from romaine lettuce, where if you take a big piece of romaine lettuce and you start stripping away the leaves and you get down to that small tail of it, it looks a lot like just a big head of romaine lettuce. To demonstrate this, if we take this stripped away romaine lettuce and just make it larger, it looks a lot like the original romaine lettuce that we started with. So self-similarity is everywhere in nature. Similar to hierarchy, the value of this type of symmetry is that it greatly reduces the amount of information needed to both describe and generate a system. We can actually take this one step further. There's a special type of self-similarity where the elements of a system not only resemble the larger system, but they are exactly identical. And we call these types of systems fractals. An application of this idea I use most often in my business comes again from Nassim Taleb in his book Antifragile, where he describes how we can use fractals in risk allocation. He describes this so-called barbell strategy, which is a way to approach diversification. If you have two options, a safe bet versus a risky bet. For me, the safe bet is making content about AI. The risky bet is making content about other things that I find interesting, like entrepreneurship and this video. And so the barbell strategy says I should make 80% of my content about the safe stuff, the stuff I know people would be interested in, and I should make 20% of my content about the risky stuff, the stuff that I'm not sure that people will like. Where fractals come in is if we want to have a finer resolution for our risky bets, we can zoom in to this 20% here and apply this 80-20 barbell strategy once again. So if we split this 20% into 80% and 20%, that would have us allot 16% to a less risky bet and 4% to a more risky bet. What this might be is that 16% of my content is about my entrepreneurship journey, which people seem to like, but not like as much as the AI and data science content, while 4% will be more risky and will be my content like this, or the content I've made on personal development and philosophy. That brings us to the end. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more, check out the Medium blog associated with this video. This idea of drawing wisdom and inspiration from nature is such a deep and rich topic. There's no way I could capture its full richness in just one video or blog article. That's why if this is something that you've also been thinking about and exploring, I invite you to drop a comment below sharing your own insights and experience. And as always, thank you so much for your time and thanks for watching.